Julian Croft despised loose ends. They were untidy, inefficient, and, worst of all, they were liabilities that clung to a balance sheet like barnacles on the hull of a racing yacht. His world was one of polished chrome, smoked glass, and the quiet, authoritative hum of capital being deployed. From his 40th floor office, the city below was a schematic, a collection of assets and depreciations, and he was one of its principal architects. Today's loose end was a factory in the industrial suburbs, a recent acquisition folded into his conglomerate, Omnicorp. The acquisition had been for the land and the patents, the physical contents were an annoyance. His head of acquisitions, a man with a perpetually nervous smile, stood before his monolithic desk. "The facility is cleared, Mr. Croft," the man said, holding a tablet displaying a series of bleak, grainy images. "Just the final scrap and machinery disposal to finalize. We have a quote from a reclamation company for removal and disposal. 80,000. Croft did not look up from the document he was signing. His pen, a heavy instrument of gold and lacquer, moved with surgical precision. 80,000 to haul away junk, he asked, the question hanging in the chilled air. It was not a genuine inquiry, it was a judgment. That is not a solution. That is a cost. Find someone who will pay us to take it. I don't care if it's $1. Get it off the books by the end of the week. Is that understood?" "Yes, Mr. Croft. But the heavy machinery, it's specialized. Most of it is bolted to the foundation. It will require a specialized crew." Croft finally looked up. His eyes were the color of a winter sky, and they held no warmth. "Then find a specialized idiot. List it as salvage. As is, where is? Buyer responsible for removal. I want that line item showing a net positive, even if it's by a single cent. Make it happen." He signed the last document and slid the stack across the desk. The interview was over. The loose end had been delegated. He swiveled his chair back to the window, watching the distant, silent flow of traffic, his thoughts already moving on to a multi-billion-dollar currency arbitrage. The factory, its contents, and the people who once worked there had already ceased to exist in his mind. 30 miles away, in a world of concrete floors and the clean scent of cutting fluid, Elias Vance wiped his hands on a red rag. His shop was not large, but it was a temple of order. Every wrench, every caliper, every drill bit had its designated place on the pegboard walls or in the meticulously labeled drawers of his rolling tool chests. The centerpiece of the shop was a formidable but well-maintained Bridgeport mill, its iron surfaces gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Elias moved with an unhurried economy of motion, a man who understood that haste was the enemy of precision. He was of average height and build, his features plain but his eyes sharp and observant. He wore simple flannel and denim, clothes meant for work, not for show. His world was not one of balance sheets, but of tolerances measured in 10,000ths of an inch. A small figure appeared at the door connecting the shop to the modest house behind it. It was his daughter, Lily, who was 8 years old. She had her mother's serious eyes and her father's quiet demeanor. She held up a drawing, a colorful crayon depiction of a robot with gears for eyes. "I finished it," she said, her voice soft. Elias turned, his expression softening instantly. He knelt down to her level, studying the artwork with the same focused attention he would give a complex schematic. "The gear meshing is very good," he said with complete sincerity. "And you used a helical pattern for the arms. That's for quiet operation." Lily beamed. "So you can't hear him sneaking up." "Very practical," Elias agreed, a rare, small smile touching his lips. He pinned the drawing to a corkboard already crowded with similar masterpieces. This was his world. It was quiet, it was contained, and it was enough. The roaring, high-stakes universe he had once inhabited felt like a story about someone else, a life lived in another age. That other life was something he rarely spoke of, even to his closest friend, Marcus Thorne. Marcus was a lawyer, a man who lived in the world of contracts and litigation that Elias had so deliberately left behind. He came by the shop once a week, ostensibly to check on legal matters for Elias's small business, but mostly to make sure his friend had not completely disappeared into his self-imposed isolation. He found Elias calibrating the digital readout on his lathe, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Still chasing perfection, I see," Marcus said, leaning against a workbench. Elias did not look up. He made a final, minute adjustment with a small screwdriver. Perfection is a direction, not a destination, he murmured, quoting one of his old professors. He powered the machine on, watched the display settle on a perfect 0, and then turned to his friend. "What's on your mind, Marcus?" Marcus sighed, pushing his glasses up his nose. "I worry about you, Eli. And Lily. This is fine, doing small jobs for the local garages, but you're capable of so much more. I was looking at your old patents the other day. The one for the harmonic dampening system in gyroscopic mounts. Do you know what a company would pay for a mind like yours right now? Aerodyne was built on your designs." Elias's face became a stoic mask. Aerodyne Precision had been his former life. A boutique engineering firm that had been a haven for brilliant, obsessive minds like his. He had been their lead systems architect, designing components for aerospace and medical imaging that were considered the gold standard. They had been a family. Then Omnicorp had bought them. Julian Croft had seen value in their patent portfolio, not their people. He had stripped the company, absorbed the intellectual property, and laid everyone off. The soul of the place had been extinguished in a single fiscal quarter. That had been difficult, but it was what came after that had broken him. Lena, his wife, had been killed in a car accident just 6 months later. The two events had fused in his mind into a single, overwhelming cataclysm. The world of corporate ambition and relentless pressure had taken everything. So he had walked away, taking his daughter and his tools, and had built this small, quiet life, a fortress against the chaos. "That life is over," Elias said, his voice flat. "Lily needs me here. This is what matters now," he gestured to the small, orderly shop. "This is real. The rest was just noise." Marcus knew better than to push. He had seen the hollowness in his friend's eyes after Lena's death. He understood, even if he didn't fully agree with, the retreat. He changed the subject. "Well, speaking of junk," he said, pulling a folded printout from his jacket pocket. "I saw this and thought of you. It's a liquidation listing. Omnicorp is clearing out that old automotive plant they bought last year. Selling off the remaining contents for scrap." Elias took the paper, his interest piqued only by the mention of old machinery. He scanned the list of assets. It was mostly standard industrial surplus, conveyor belts, hydraulic presses, welding robots. Uninteresting. But then his eyes stopped on one line item, a single, innocuous entry that made the air catch in his throat. Lot 7, assorted heavy machining equipment, including KNRM7 milling center. He read it again. KNRM7. Coons and Richter Model 7. It couldn't be. He thought they had all been destroyed or lost. The Model 7 was a legend among a very small, very specific circle of engineers and machinists. A machine built in West Germany in the late 1980s, a cost-is-no-object exercise in mechanical perfection. It was a 5-axis mill built on a single, massive granite block to eliminate vibration, with hydrostatic bearings and a control system so advanced for its time it was practically alien technology. Only a dozen were ever made before the company went bankrupt. They were rumored to be able to hold tolerances that modern machines, for all their speed and software, still struggled to replicate. To a man like Julian Croft, it would look like a 30-ton dinosaur. To a man like Elias Vance, it was the Holy Grail. "What is it?" Marcus asked, seeing the flicker of something in his friend's otherwise unreadable expression. "It's probably nothing," Elias said, folding the paper carefully and tucking it into his shirt pocket. His voice was calm, but his mind was racing. "Just an old machine. I might go take a look." The next day, Elias drove his old, reliable pickup truck to the defunct factory. The place was a carcass, picked over and desolate. A young woman in a sharp, dark business suit stood near the entrance, a clipboard in her hand and an expression of profound boredom on her face. This was Anya Albright, Julian Croft's executive assistant, tasked with the demeaning job of overseeing the final disposal. She looked at Elias and his work-worn clothes with a flicker of dismissive appraisal. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone clipped. "I'm here about the salvage listing," Elias said. "Lot 7. The heavy machinery," she sighed, as if the very words were an inconvenience. "Right this way. And be careful. This facility is being decommissioned. We are not liable for any injuries." She led him into the cavernous main floor of the factory. It was a graveyard of industry. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light cutting through the grimy clerestory windows. In the center of the vast space, covered in a thick layer of dust and draped with yellowed tarps, sat a cluster of machines. Elias's heart beat a little faster. Anya pointed a pen toward the hulking shapes. "That's it," she said. "As is, where is?" "The buyer is responsible for all costs of removal, including any necessary disassembly and transport. We need it gone by Friday." Elias walked slowly toward the machines, his hands in his pockets. He ignored the lesser pieces, the big, clumsy presses and grinders. He walked straight to the largest of them, a massive, shrouded block of metal and wires. He reached out and pulled back a corner of the tarp. The distinctive angular housing, the unique tool-changer carousel, the faint outline of the Coons and Richter nameplate under the grime. It was real. His breath hitched almost imperceptibly. He ran a hand over the cold, dusty control panel. The screen was dark, the machine dormant for years, but he could feel the latent power within it, the sheer, uncompromising quality of its construction. He could see the stress fractures in the concrete floor beneath it, a testament to its immense weight. "It's a big piece of junk," Anya said, misinterpreting his silence as dismay. "Honestly, we were expecting to have to pay to have it cut up and hauled out." Elias let the tarp fall back into place. He turned to her, his face impassive. "The listing said you'd take offers." "We will entertain any serious offer that includes removal by the deadline," she replied, her voice laced with the weary condescension of someone who just wanted this tedious task to be over. Elias looked at the machine, then back at her. $1,000, he said. Anya Albright blinked. She had been expecting a lowball offer, perhaps a negotiation about who would pay for the crane. But this was insulting. Or, from her company's perspective, it was perfect. She almost laughed. Some local scrap dealer trying his luck. Her boss had told her to get it off the books for a net positive. This was $1,000 more positive than he had expected. $1,000, and you have it out of here by Friday, at your own expense, she confirmed, a hint of amusement in her voice. "That's my offer," Elias said quietly. "Sold," she said instantly, before he could change his mind. She made a note on her clipboard. "We'll have the paperwork drawn up this afternoon. It's a standard quitclaim bill of sale. No warranties, no guarantees. Once you pay, it's your problem." "That's acceptable," Elias said. He did not smile. He did not show any sign of triumph. He simply nodded, his gaze lingering on the shrouded machine for a moment before he turned and walked away. Anya watched him go, shaking her head slightly. She felt a strange, fleeting sense of unease, a feeling that she was missing something important. But she dismissed it. She had followed her orders. She had turned a liability into a small profit. Mr. Croft would be pleased. She sent a brief, efficient email to her boss. Lot 7 machinery sold for $1,000. Removal by end of week. Problem solved. Croft replied a minute later with a single letter, Y. The next 48 hours were a blur of focused activity for Elias. He called Marcus to review the hastily drawn-up sales contract, which was as one-sided and dismissive as he had expected. Marcus read it, his eyebrows rising. "Eli, this is a joke. They're basically making you sign away your right to sue them if the floor collapses under you. There's no warranty of title, even. They're treating this like they're letting you haul away their garbage." "That's what they think they're doing," Elias said. "Is it legal?" "Technically. Yes. It's also malpractice on their part not to do their due diligence, but that's not our problem. I'll approve it." Elias then made another call, to a man named Gus, a heavy-haul rigging specialist he had worked with at Aerodyne. Gus was a grizzled veteran who owned his own crane and lowboy trailer, a man who understood the delicate art of moving massive, sensitive equipment. "Eli. Haven't heard that name in a while," Gus's gravelly voice came over the phone. "What do you need?" "I need a lift," Elias said. 30 tons. And it needs to be gentle." There was a whistle on the other end of the line. 30 tons gentle is a $5,000 job, Eli. You got that kind of money these days?" "I do," Elias said simply. He had the money from Lena's life insurance, a fund he had never touched, a sacred trust he had intended to keep for Lily's future. For this, he would make an exception. This was an investment in that future. On Thursday, a day before the deadline, Gus's massive crane rolled into the derelict factory yard. Anya Albright was there to supervise, her arms crossed, a look of skeptical impatience on her face. She watched as Elias and Gus's small, professional crew worked for hours, not with brute force, but with a watchmaker's care. They unbolted the machine from the foundation, used industrial skates to slide it painstakingly into position, and then, with a complex web of straps and chains, Gus lifted the 30-ton behemoth into the air. The crane groaned under the strain, but the lift was smooth, a slow, graceful ascent. The machine was settled onto the back of the lowboy trailer with barely a tremor. Anya watched the entire proceeding with a growing sense of bewilderment. This was not the work of a scrap dealer. This was the work of experts. The unease she had felt before returned, stronger this time. Back at his shop, Elias had already prepared the space. He had cleared the entire back half, reinforcing the concrete slab weeks earlier for a heavy lathe he had been considering buying, a fortunate coincidence. The arrival of the Coons and Richter was a momentous occasion. As it was carefully lowered onto the new slab, it felt less like an installation and more like an enthronement. It dwarfed everything else in the shop, a sleeping giant of iron and granite. For the next 3 months, the machine was Elias's singular focus. Lily would often sit on a stool in the corner, drawing or reading, while her father worked. She watched him as he began the painstaking process of restoration. He started by cleaning. He spent a week just removing years of accumulated grime, using special solvents and soft cloths, treating the machine with a reverence that bordered on archaeological. Beneath the filth, the original gunmetal gray paint was mostly intact, the stainless steel fixtures still bright. He brought in 2 old colleagues from Aerodyne, a grizzled electronics wizard named Dave and a master machinist named Carl. Both had been forced into early retirement by the Omnicorp takeover. When they saw the machine, they stopped dead, their eyes wide with disbelief. "I'll be damned," Carl whispered, running a hand over the massive granite base. "It's a Model 7. I thought these were myths." "It's real," Elias said. "And it needs work. The control system is fried, and the hydraulics are leaking." Dave, the electronics expert, peered into the main control cabinet, a space filled with a labyrinth of circuit boards and thick cables. "This is pre-Ethernet, pre-USB. It's a proprietary architecture. Finding schematics will be impossible." "I don't need schematics," Elias said. He had spent his youth studying machines like this, memorizing their logic, their flow. He began to trace the circuits himself, drawing his own diagrams on a large whiteboard. For weeks, the 3 men worked. They flushed and replaced every drop of hydraulic fluid. They disassembled the spindle, cleaning and measuring the hydrostatic bearings, finding them, to their astonishment, still within factory tolerance. Dave, guided by Elias's hand-drawn schematics, painstakingly bypassed the fried sections of the original controller, retrofitting a modern interface while preserving the machine's unique and irreplaceable motion control hardware. It was a delicate, surgical process, a fusion of old-world mechanics and new-world technology. There were setbacks. A crucial power supply was dead. A search for a replacement proved fruitless. Elias spent 2 days in his small electronics corner, meticulously unwinding the transformer, finding the microscopic break in the coil, and repairing it with a surgeon's steady hand. A set of seals for the hydraulic actuators had petrified. The original manufacturer was long gone. Carl, using the shop's smaller lathe, machined new ones from a block of specialized polymer, working from Elias's precise measurements. They were not just repairing a machine, they were resurrecting it. Finally, the day came. Elias stood before the control panel, his hand hovering over the main power switch. Dave and Carl stood behind him, silent and expectant. He flipped the switch. A low hum filled the shop as the massive power supplies came online. The new monitor he had fitted flickered to life, displaying the boot sequence of the software he had written to interface with the old hardware. One by one, the system status lights on the panel turned from red to green. The hydraulics pressurized with a soft hiss. "Run the calibration sequence," Carl said, his voice tight with anticipation. Elias typed a command. The massive milling head, a solid block of steel weighing over a ton, began to move. It glided through the air with an eerie silence, the hydrostatic bearings making it seem almost weightless. It moved with a liquid grace that defied its size, a predator awakening from a long slumber. For an hour, it performed its intricate dance, touching probes to calibration points, adjusting itself, learning the precise dimensions of its own being. When it finished, it returned to its home position and fell silent. A single line of text appeared on the screen: calibration complete. All axes nominal. Positional deviation, plus or minus 0.00005 mm. Dave let out a long, slow breath. Half a micron, he said in awe. I've never seen a machine that big hold half a micron. Elias felt a quiet, profound satisfaction. He had been right. He had known, the moment he saw the listing, the treasure that lay hidden under the dusty tarp. He had turned Julian Croft's forgotten junk into what was now, arguably, one of the most precise large-format milling machines on the continent. His new company, which he simply called Vance Precision, began taking on small, difficult jobs. Word spread quietly through the tight-knit community of high-end manufacturing. Here was a shop that could handle the impossible, the jobs that required a level of precision that other, larger companies could not achieve. The money was good, enough to hire Dave and Carl full-time and to start building a stable future for Lily. But the true test, the moment of validation, was yet to come. It arrived in the form of a phone call from a company called Stellar Dynamics, a major aerospace contractor. They were in a state of panic. A multi-billion-dollar communications satellite, their flagship project, was grounded. A critical component in the satellite's main antenna deployment gimbal, a complex piece of machined titanium, had a microscopic manufacturing flaw. The flaw was causing a harmonic vibration at a specific frequency, which would tear the antenna apart during deployment. They had already broken 3 prototypes trying to fix it. Their own in-house machine shops couldn't produce a replacement with the required tolerance. The lead engineer from Stellar Dynamics, a harried-looking man named Peterson, arrived at Elias's shop. He was skeptical, having been sent here on the recommendation of a subcontractor who had been impressed with Elias's work. He looked around the small, unassuming facility. "We have a problem, Mr. Vance," Peterson said, unrolling a set of complex blueprints on Elias's workbench. "This component. We need a new one. The internal helical channel has to be machined to a surface smoothness of less than 0.1 micrometers, and the overall dimensional tolerance is plus or minus 2 microns. Our own engineers, the best in the business, told us it would take a $500,000 retooling of our facility and at least 6 months to develop a process to even attempt it. We don't have 6 months. The launch window is in 3 weeks." Elias studied the blueprints. He did not look at the complex geometry. He looked at the tolerance block, the tiny numbers that defined the component's perfection. He recognized the problem instantly. It was not a matter of brute force or expensive new equipment. It was a problem of stability. The vibrations from the cutting tool itself, no matter how advanced, were creating the microscopic flaws. To solve it, you needed a machine that was fundamentally, unshakably stable. You needed a machine built on a mountain of granite. "It'll take $500,000 and 6 months, the engineer said. The words echoed in the quiet shop. Peterson was presenting it as an insurmountable obstacle. To Elias, it was an opportunity. He looked from the blueprint to the silent, massive form of the Coons and Richter Model 7. "I can do it," Elias said. Peterson stared at him. "You can do it? Just like that? How?" "I have the right tool for the job," Elias replied, his voice even. "And your price?" Peterson asked, bracing himself. $100,000, Elias said. "And I'll have it for you in 4 days." Peterson was speechless. It was an absurd claim. But he was desperate. The alternative was catastrophic failure. He agreed. He had them messenger a solid billet of the specialized titanium alloy to the shop that afternoon. For the next 4 days, the Coons and Richter ran almost continuously. Elias programmed the complex toolpaths himself, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He didn't use a prepackaged CAM software. He wrote the G-code line by line, controlling every minute movement, every change in spindle speed, every application of coolant. He treated it not as a manufacturing process, but as a sculpture. The machine, silent and precise, carved the titanium. There was no chatter, no vibration, just the clean, whisper-quiet shear of metal. The spare bolt that would solve the $500,000 problem was not a bolt at all, it was the single, perfectly realized component, created through a combination of forgotten technology and singular human expertise. On the fourth day, he called Peterson. The engineer arrived with a team and a cart full of sophisticated laser measuring equipment. For hours, they scanned and probed the component Elias had made. They huddled around their laptops, their expressions shifting from skepticism to disbelief, and finally, to utter astonishment. Peterson approached Elias, holding a printout of the measurement data. His face was pale. "I don't understand," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The deviation on every critical surface, it's less than a micron. In some places, it's effectively zero. It's perfect. How is this possible?" Elias simply looked over at the big German machine, which sat silent and waiting. "I had the right tool," he said again. The news of Stellar Dynamics' successful satellite launch, saved at the last minute by a small, unknown contractor, made a minor splash in the aerospace trade publications. It was a technical story, full of jargon, but one name was mentioned repeatedly: Vance Precision. In his office on the 40th floor, Julian Croft was having a very bad day. A major acquisition was falling apart. He was berating his legal team over a conference call when his assistant, Anya Albright, entered his office and stood silently, waiting. He finished the call with a snarl and slammed the phone down. "What is it?" he snapped. Anya held up a tablet displaying the article about Stellar Dynamics. "Sir, I think you need to see this. Specifically, the contractor they credit with solving their gimbal problem." Croft snatched the tablet and scanned the article, his impatience evident. "Vance Precision. So what? Some little machine shop got lucky." "The name seemed familiar to me, sir," Anya said, her voice steady. "I looked into them. The company was incorporated 3 months ago. The principal owner is a man named Elias Vance." The name meant nothing to Croft. He waved a hand dismissively. And 6 months ago," Anya continued, her heart pounding, "we sold a decommissioned lot of scrap machinery from the old Detroit plant to a man named Elias Vance for $1,000. The silence in the room became heavy and absolute. Croft stared at her, his mind slowly, furiously connecting the dots. The worthless junk. The condescending sale. The quiet man in the flannel shirt. He pulled up the original asset disposal report on his own computer, his fingers stabbing at the keys. He saw the line item, Lot 7, sold to E. Vance, $1,000. He then cross-referenced the original asset manifest from the factory acquisition. He scrolled down the list of decades-old equipment until he found it. Coons and Richter M7 Milling Center. Book value, $0. Disposal recommended. Croft was not an engineer. He did not know what a Coons and Richter M7 was. But he was a master of sniffing out value, and the smell of a colossal, humiliating blunder was now filling his pristine office. He spent the next hour in a cold fury, having his research team dig up everything they could on the machine and on Elias Vance. The report they compiled was damning. They found the original purchase order from the 1980s, the machine had cost the equivalent of $3 million. They found technical articles lauding its legendary precision. And they found Elias Vance's employment history. Lead systems architect at Aerodyne Precision, the company Omnicorp had dismembered. The holder of 17 key patents that Omnicorp now owned. The scale of the error was breathtaking. He had not just thrown away a piece of scrap. He had handed a priceless strategic asset to the very men who knew exactly what to do with it. He had, in his arrogance, armed his own victim. The $80,000 disposal fee he had so cleverly avoided now seemed like a pittance compared to the millions he had lost. The acquisitions manager who had overseen the factory clearance was fired before lunch, a sacrificial lamb to Croft's rage. But that was not enough. Croft needed to fix this. He needed to get the machine back. He drove himself, in his gleaming black sedan, out to the industrial park where Vance Precision was located. He found the small, clean shop, a place so insignificant it was almost an insult. He walked inside, his expensive leather shoes clicking on the concrete floor. Elias was at a workbench, showing Lily how to use a digital caliper. He looked up as Croft entered, his expression unreadable. The two men stood for a moment, the silence thick with unspoken history. The titan of industry and the quiet machinist. The buyer and the seller. The roles, however, had been irrevocably reversed. "Vance," Croft said, his voice tight with forced composure. "You've done well for yourself with that old piece of junk I sold you." Elias did not rise to the bait. He placed the caliper carefully back in its case. "It's a good machine," he said. "I'm prepared to make you a generous offer to buy it back," Croft said, getting straight to the point. "Name your price." $1 million. 2-inch. Elias looked at him, then at the massive, quiet machine that dominated the room. "It's not for sale." Croft's composure began to crack. "Don't be a fool. Everything has a price. I'll make you a partner. Omnicorp can open doors for you that you can't even imagine. We can build a whole new division around this technology, with you at the head of it." It was the ultimate offer from a man like Croft, the promise of wealth and status. It was the very world Elias had abandoned. He thought of Aerodyne, of the family of engineers who had been scattered to the wind. He thought of Lena, and the life they had planned before it was all torn apart. He looked at Lily, who was watching the exchange with her serious, knowing eyes. "I already have a company," Elias said, his voice quiet but firm. "And I'm not looking for a partner. Especially not one who destroys everything he touches." The words struck Croft with the force of a physical blow. It was the first time in years anyone had spoken to him with such blunt, unvarnished truth. He saw in Elias's calm gaze not hatred or a desire for revenge, but something far more galling, indifference. Elias did not need his money. He did not need his approval. He had already won, and he had done it on his own terms. Julian Croft stood there for another moment, his empire and his arrogance rendered powerless in this small, clean room. He had no leverage here. He had no angle. He had made a mistake, a fundamental misjudgment of value, and the consequences were now absolute. He turned without another word and walked out of the shop, the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights seeming to mock his retreat. In the months that followed, Vance's precision grew. Elias hired more of his old team from Aerodyne, men and women who had been cast aside by Omnicorp, all of them brilliant and eager for the chance to do good work again. They did not become a massive corporation. They became a boutique, a specialist shop that took on the hardest jobs and delivered flawless results. They fabricated components for medical scanners, for deep-sea submersibles, for fusion research projects. The money flowed in, but it did not change the core of the men or the company. Elias still wore flannel to work. He still ate lunch with Lily every day in the small kitchen behind the shop. One afternoon, he put up a new sign over the door. It was simple, made of brushed aluminum with clean, sans serif letters. It just said, "Vance Precision." It was not a monument to wealth or power. It was a statement of fact, a quiet declaration of competence. He stood back, looking at it, with Lily holding his hand. His victory was not in Julian Croft's defeat, which was now a quiet footnote in the business pages as Omnicorp's stock faltered after a series of high-profile project failures. His victory was here, in the solid, tangible reality of the humming machines, in the respect of his peers, in the secure and peaceful future he was building for his daughter. He had looked at what the world called worthless and had seen its true potential. He had not sought revenge, he had simply done the work. And in the quiet, methodical world of Elias Vance, good work was its own, and only, necessary reward.